Imagine a path so ancient no map remembers it, worn not by wheels or boots, but by the passing of whispers. Now step closer. Can you feel it? That hush beneath the trees? That stillness, just before the wind changes. This is no ordinary forest. Here, in the hush of moss and mist, truth is older than language. Beneath these oaks, power once pulsed through the roots, through the stones, through the souls of those who walked with secrets. They were called Druids. Not kings, yet they advised them. Not warriors, yet they stirred them. They read no scrolls, penned no books, but knew the sky, the herbs, the shadows, and the fire. And though their voices were silenced long ago, the land remembers. Shall we step back in time, and see how they lived, loved, and dreamed? Follow me into the sacred groves. The journey begins where history ends, and myth begins to breathe. The path winds downward now. The earth beneath your feet is soft with old leaves, and each step seems to sink into the breath of centuries. Light filters through the canopy in shafts of gold, flickering like forgotten memories on bark and bramble. The forest speaks and rustles and caws, in the distant call of a blackbird and the rhythmic sigh of the wind high in the oaks. You are walking not just through a woodland, but through something older, a place that hums with the memory of those who came before. You pause beside a gnarled tree, its roots twisted like the knuckles of an ancient hand. And you wonder, who were they, really? The ones called Druids. Most people, when they hear the word, picture robes and staffs, perhaps a man with a long beard, eyes clouded with mystery. But that image, that soft focus relic from a fantasy film, isn't quite right. Or rather, it's only a shadow of a truth much deeper, more dangerous, and infinitely more strange. To know the Druids, we must first step into a world where power was not held by thrones alone. Here, in the damp breath of misted glades, among the Celts of ancient Gaul, Britannia, and Hibernia, power flowed through bloodlines, yes, but also through those who knew the language of the land. Those who listened to the wind's counsel, who read the shape of birds in flight, who could stand beside a warrior and murmur words to still his shaking hands before battle. Those who guided the rhythm of life not with swords or coins, but with memory. Because the Druids held memory, not as historians with scrolls, but as vessels of everything a tribe was. Their names are lost to us, mostly. No carved monuments, no lists of great deeds. But their presence looms large in the writings of others. Julius Caesar, for all his pride and Roman certainty, feared them enough to name them, to condemn them, to hunt them. Why? Because the Druids were not mere priests, though they performed sacrifices and led sacred rites. They were not only judges, though their word could settle feuds and spare or doom a man. They were not just astronomers or healers or poets or seers, though they were all those things too. They were the center. To the Celtic tribes, a druid was something like the axle in a wheel of life. Without them, things wobbled, collapsed. With them, society had roots. Roots not in buildings or bureaucracy, but in the breathless, invisible world between flesh and spirit, between the waking and the dreamed. And so their power came from what they remembered, and what they refused to write down. Imagine that, in a world where empires carved laws into stone, these people trusted only the voice, only the ear. A young druid might spend 20 years learning, 20 years of memorizing lore, laws, lineages, songs, stories, omens, cures, curses, charms, prayers, myths, and the movements of the stars. All committed not to parchment but to the marrow. A tradition passed from mouth to mouth, like breath. Their training was long, rigorous, sometimes brutal. But those who emerged from that fire became something rare. A living library. A keeper of balance. Not bound to a single tribe, but honored by many. They moved between kings and clans like wind between stones, silent but vital. And with that silence came fear. The Romans, ever hungry for conquest, found themselves puzzled by the Celts. These weren't barbarians in the way Rome liked to imagine them. Yes, they fought fiercely, with wild cries and painted skin. But beneath the chaos was structure, ceremony, a deep respect for cycles, of nature, of death, of law. And at the heart of it all, the Druids. They spoke to the dead. They decided when war was righteous and when it was folly. They guarded sacred knowledge, hidden deep in groves and behind riddles. They could, it was said, cloud a man's mind with a glance or twist fate with a single chant. And so, Caesar declared them dangerous. Not just because they opposed Roman rule, but because their authority came from something Rome couldn't touch. They weren't kings to be bribed or warriors to be defeated. They were ideas clothed in flesh. That made them enemies of empire. But the Druids were more than their Roman portrayals. Step closer. Let me show you not the enemy in Caesar's scrolls, but the person behind the cloak. You walk now through a clearing, the trees drawing back as though to honor a presence that still lingers. The air shifts. It's quieter here. Thicker. Picture a druid, perhaps not old, not bearded, but a woman with weathered skin and eyes like flint. She kneels beside a spring, muttering to herself in a language that never knew ink. Her fingers trace the rim of a wooden bowl. Her breath stirs the mist that curls from the water like incense. She is reading the future, not in stars, but in ripples. Or another, a man in the highlands, dressed in furs and wool, walking among stones as the sun rises behind him. He stops, lays his hands on a standing stone etched with lichen. He closes his eyes. To the untrained watcher, he is still. But inside, he is listening, feeling the tug of the earth beneath his feet, marking the season, the scent of the air, the presence of something just beyond sight. This is what it meant to be a druid. To know the land not as scenery, but as scripture. To treat time not as a line but a circle. To see stories where others saw only stones. And to speak in silences that others feared to break. There's something else, too, something hard to name. Druids were not simply wise. They were feared. Respected, yes, but feared. Because they understood boundaries. Not just of property or tribe, but between life and death. Between sanity and madness. Between what a person should know, and what they should not. They could curse as easily as they could heal. Their words, it was said, could twist inside a person like thorns. They could cause crops to fail, or bring rain after a long drought. Of course, some of this is legend. But even legends hold truth. What is power, after all, but belief shared by many? To be a druid was to be believed in. Utterly. Completely. And belief is a force more potent than any army. You may ask, were they gods? No. But in a time before science, before medicine, before maps and clocks and charts, what is a person who can predict the eclipse, who knows the herb that cures the fever, who speaks in the voice of your ancestors, if not divine? So the line blurred. Not gods, but guides. And in guiding, they became indispensable. A tribe without a druid was a ship without a sail, a body without a heart. Their influence ran deeper than politics. It was spiritual, elemental. Which is why, when the Romans came with their legions and their laws, they knew they had to break that spine first. To conquer the Celts, you had to silence the Druids. They tried. They outlawed the rites, burned the groves, executed those caught performing ancient rituals. Some Druids died with curses on their lips. Others vanished into the forests. But you cannot kill the wind by cutting down the tree. The knowledge went underground. Into whispers. Into folklore. Into dreams. And though we have no books written by Druids, their presence lingers. In the rhythm of Celtic languages, in the spiral carvings on forgotten stones, in the way certain festivals still mark the turning of seasons. They are gone, yes. But listen closely. The forest remembers. And so do we. The forest thickens as you walk, Branches knit overhead into a vault of shadow and light, and the air cools with each step, rich with the scent of moss and bark and something older, something metallic, like stone touched by time. A raven croaks overhead and vanishes between the trees. And as you pass beneath a twisted arch of ash and elder, a thought begins to stir, soft as the hush beneath snowfall. How is it that a people so powerful, so central to their world, left behind nothing? No scrolls. No tomes. No hidden codices buried in the roots of trees. No Druidic gospel. Only what others said of them. Romans. Christian monks. Later bards. Echoes of echoes. It seems almost impossible, doesn't it? That an entire class of sages and priests, judges and astronomers, should vanish without a single self-penned word. And yet, that silence is the key. It was not absence. It was intention. The Druids did not write. And not because they lacked the means. The Celts were no strangers to writing. They knew of alphabets, Greek and Latin, and the native agam scratched along the edges of stones. Traders brought ink and papyrus. Laws were carved, records kept. The technology existed. But the Druids refused. Why? Because writing to them was not progress. It was peril. You kneel now beside a boulder, half buried in ferns. Its surface is carved with agam, not Druidic, but kin to it. Simple lines, angled like slashes of light. These marks speak names, territories, dedications. But not doctrine. Not lore. That was never meant for stone. Druids believed that memory, true memory, lived in the body. In the tongue and the ear. In the warmth of a living voice. Words, once written, could be misused. Misread. Stripped of context. Stolen by the unworthy. A chant misremembered by a child becomes a rhyme. But a spell misread by a conqueror becomes a weapon. So they held their secrets close. In breath, not ink. Caesar, frustrated, remarked on this in his Commentary de Bello Gallico. He noted the Druids' great knowledge, but also their refusal to commit their teachings to writing. He speculated, with Roman logic, that this was to protect their monopoly on wisdom, to keep knowledge elite. But that's only part of the truth. The deeper reason was trust. Writing, the Druids believed, severs knowledge from the knower. When you write something down, you remove it from your body, from your soul. You fix it in time and shape. You make it vulnerable to decay, distortion, misuse. Spoken knowledge, on the other hand, is alive. It breathes, changes, grows. To memorize was to make it part of yourself. To recite it was to pass it through the vessel of your being, your mood, your breath, your cadence, your belief. It was an act of intimacy, a shared ritual. Think of it, 20 years of learning, of song and chant and spoken law, of secrets that could never be skimmed, quoted, or copied. That could only be known by living them. Knowledge not as property, but as inheritance. The Celts were a people of the voice. Their bards could recite epic tales for hours, weaving history into rhythm. Their laws were spoken aloud at seasonal gatherings, memorized by judges and reaffirmed by witnesses. Even disputes were resolved through public dialogue, not contracts. The Druid was the ultimate expression of this oral culture. But not all memory is kind, and not all silence is peace. For with the refusal to write came vulnerability. When Rome came with fire and steel, they burned not libraries, but groves. And when Christianity swept across the isles, it brought parchment and ink, and a hunger to record. And so the story of the Druids, once kept in breath and bone, passed into the hands of others. Of monks cloistered in candlelit scriptoria. Of chroniclers with quills dipped in both reverence and suspicion. They wrote of Druids as magicians, as sorcerers, as witches, as wise men, as devilkin, some with awe, some with fear, all with distance. The real voices, the chants, the rituals, the prayers murmured under moonlight, they dissolved like mist at sunrise. And so the Druid became myth, because they had left no words of their own. Imagine standing in a room where someone once sang a beautiful, terrifying song, but you've arrived too late. The singer is gone. The air still vibrates faintly, but you can't grasp the melody. That's how we know the Druids. Not from their words, but from the space their silence left behind. And yet, if you listen very carefully, there are echoes. In Irish law tracts, we find hints of Druidic precedent, the shape of old judgments wrapped in Christian robes. In Welsh triads, terse and poetic, we glimpse fragments of oral teachings, compressed into verse like seeds in amber. In the stories of saints and sinners, we hear of holy men debating with lingering pagans, still loyal to the old ways. And in the folk tales, those strange, glimmering tales told beside hearths for centuries, we find archetypes too stubborn to die. The wise woman in the woods, the man who knows the language of birds, the judge who sees through lies, the priest who walks with animals, who speaks with stones, who burns nothing and builds no church. These are not Christian saints. These are remnants, Druid ghosts. So the silence of writing was not an end, but a hiding place, a veil, a test. Only those who listen, truly listen, will find them. And here, in this forest where the leaves murmur like tongues, where the wind runs its fingers through your hair like an old lover, you begin to hear them. Not words, but a rhythm. A kind of pulse, slow and deep, like the beating of the earth's heart. The silence is not empty. It is full. And it is watching you. The silence shifts. Not a break, not a rupture, but a deepening. A softening. As though the air itself has drawn a long, slow breath. You move now through underbrush, brushing past ferns heavy with dew. The trees lean in closer, their trunks thick with moss, their canopies so dense they seem to trap time itself. The forest has changed. This is not just woodland. You've stepped into something else. A place where footsteps feel louder than they should. Where the birds hush mid-call. Where the light falls strange, dappled and golden, like sunlight filtered through memory. You can feel it. The weight of it. Not heavy, exactly, more like being watched by something vast and old. Not unfriendly, but older than friendship. This is a grove. And not just any grove. A sacred grove. You don't need a sign to tell you that. Your skin knows. The hairs on your arms rise as though whispering warnings to one another. The ground here feels different underfoot, springy with generations of fallen leaves, yet firm, like walking atop the back of some ancient, sleeping beast. Here is where the Druids stood. Not in temples of stone. Not in gilded halls or painted chapels. Here, in clearings cut not by axes, but by time and reverence. To understand the Druids, to truly feel what they were, you must know this. Their sacred spaces were not built. They were found. Chosen. Not by men, but by the land. Because to a Druid, the divine was not up in the sky behind gates of pearl. It was here, beneath your feet. In the bark of a tree, in the spiral of a snail's shell, in the slow dance of mist through bracken. And certain places, hummed. Groves were those places. Natural sanctuaries, ringed with oaks or yews, where the veil between the worlds wore thin. You stop in the center of the clearing. No altar. No statue. Just a circle of trees, silent as sentinels. Their branches arch overhead like cathedral vaults, their roots tangling together beneath you like braided memory. To call this a temple would be to misunderstand. This is not a place built for worship. It is worship. Every leaf a psalm. Every breath a prayer. The Druids revered many aspects of the world, but none more than trees. And above all others, the oak. The oak. Tall. Enduring. Strong beyond belief. Its branches broad, its leaves thick, its acorns potent symbols of rebirth. To the Druidic mind, the oak was not merely a tree, it was a pillar between worlds, a link between earth and sky, between what is seen and what is known. Its name in their ancient tongue may have meant simply door, because that's what the oak was, a threshold. And so the groves of oaks were more than meeting places. They were places of passage. Here, rituals were performed, not for spectacle, not for conversion, but for realignment. To mark the solstices and equinoxes. To bless the harvest. To name a child. To mourn the dead. To ask for visions. To listen. Always to listen. Because the groves spoke. Not in words. In signs. In patterns. In sudden silences. In the way a branch cracked under no weight at all, or the way a wind moved through the leaves in reply to a question unspoken. Some believe the Druids performed sacrifices here, blood offerings to the gods of the sky and soil. And perhaps they did. But those tales, often told by enemies, are soaked in fear and conquest. More likely, what was sacrificed here was not flesh, but certainty. Because the grove was a place where the self unraveled. Where a Druid came not to command, but to ask. To kneel. To offer their own ego to the wild. And in return, they might glimpse something. A pattern. A sign. A whisper carried on the breath of a squirrel. A question asked by the shape of mushrooms in a ring. We modern minds, so starved of symbolism, forget how to read such languages. But the Druids did not. They read the forest as scripture. Not metaphorically. Literally. A fallen tree was not just rot, it was rebirth. The slow creep of ivy across a stone was a sentence unfolding across seasons. Every tree had meaning. Ash, the world tree, whose roots tied realms together. Yew, symbol of death and eternal life, because it grows from its own decay. Hazel, bearer of wisdom, from whose nuts salmon grew wise in legend. Birch, the purifier, the first to grow after fire. And holly, guardian of the dark months, red berries like drops of lifeblood in the snow. To walk among these trees with a Druid was to walk through a living library. But the books whispered. And the knowledge, if you sought it wrongly, might twist like vines and pull you down. Because groves were not merely sacred. They were sentient. Some were gentle. Some were not. Some healed. Others tested. And still others remembered. You reach out and touch the bark of one great oak now, its trunk broad enough that 3 men might not encircle it, its bark thick with lichen. It thrums under your palm, faint but insistent. This tree was here before your grandfather's grandfather was even thought of. It has seen wars, plagues, births, storms. It has watched the Druids come and go. It has heard the old songs. And it remembers. Not in words, but in rings. Every year, a new ring beneath the bark. A new layer. A new memory. If you could read them, truly read them, you would see the rise and fall of tribes, the heat of summers long past, the heavy snow of forgotten winters. You would see rituals once held in moonlight, dancers painted in ochre, the breath of chance rising like fog. But that knowledge is not given. It is kept. Only in silence does it speak. This is why the Druids came here. Because in a world of chaos and noise, the grove was a still point. A listening place. They did not seek to tame nature, but to understand it. To speak its language. And here, among these trees, the conversation was clearest. Some groves, legend says, were so sacred that to step inside them uninvited was to vanish. Not die, vanish. Taken by the forest, or by something within it. Not as punishment, but as a kind of assimilation. A returning. These were the holy of holies. Set apart. Protected. Not by fences or guards, but by belief. And belief, when strong enough, becomes real. The Christian monks who later wrote of these groves often described them as eerie, unwholesome, filled with shadows and strange creatures. Of course they did. They did not hear the welcome, only the warning. But to the Druids the groves were not dark. They were deep, and in that depth lay truth. To step into a grove was to be stripped of pretenses, of identity, of mask. The trees saw through all of it. Here, a king was no more than a beggar, a warrior no more than a child. Only the soul mattered. And so the Druid came, again and again, through storms and frost and summer heat, not to command, but to surrender, to remember. Because memory lives not only in minds. It lives in place, in soil, in roots. And so long as the groves remain, so do the echoes. You close your eyes, and for just a moment you swear you can hear them. A rustle, too rhythmic to be wind. A murmur, too low to be leaves. Voices. Not speaking, exactly. Not to your ears. But to something older. You open your eyes. And the clearing is unchanged. But you are not. Because something has shifted in you. Some old, forgotten door creaked open a hair. And though you cannot name it, you know the trees have seen you. Not as you appear, but as you are. You leave the grove as one might leave a dream, slowly, half unwilling, glancing back over your shoulder as if to catch one last whisper curling through the trees. But the path calls. It narrows now, threading its way through bracken and thorn, climbing gradually toward open sky. The air shifts again. Still earthy, still rich with leaf and bark, but thinner now, tinged with the scent of wild thyme and the iron edge of stone. You can feel it underfoot, the hum of something vast, something old, buried in the bones of the land. And then, there it is. The trees fall away, and the sky opens like a held breath. Ahead of you, scattered across a windswept plateau, are the stones. They rise in silence, each one etched with lichen, their surfaces roughened by centuries of rain, wind, and watching. Some stand tall as giants, others squat like forgotten gods, and all of them seem placed. Not scattered, not random. Deliberate. You step closer. The nearest stone is cool beneath your hand. It leans ever so slightly eastward, and its base is buried deep in a bed of grass and heather. You walk among them, moving slowly, reverently, as though among sleeping sentinels. And with every step, the scale becomes more apparent. This is not a random collection of rocks. This is a circle. An architecture of intention. A language written not with ink, but with shadow and stone. And now you understand. The grove was the temple of breath and leaf. This is the cathedral of silence and time. We call them stone circles. Henges, cromlechs, dolmens, menhirs. Stonehenge is the most famous, its massive sarsen standing like a riddle against the sky, but it is only one of thousands scattered across the lands once roamed by Druids and their ancestors. Avebury, Castlereagh, Callanish, the Ring of Brodger, each with its own alignment, its own design, its own purpose now half forgotten. But they all speak the same language, one of rhythm, of ritual, of return. The Druids did not build all of them. Many were already ancient when the first Druid ever placed mistletoe to sickle, but they understood them. They used them. They listened to what the stones had to say. Because the stones speak in light. That is their true magic. Each stone, each gap, each arc, measured not in paces, but in shadows cast at solstice. In the angle of the sun as it slips behind the hills. In the way the moon brushes the tip of a distant peak once every 19 years. These circles are calendars. Not ones to flip or pin to a wall, but living, breathing clocks built on the body of the earth. A stone that glows gold at midsummer dawn. A gap that captures the light of the winter solstice, threading it like a spear of fire through the heart of the circle. Each placement a prayer. Each alignment a promise. And in these moments, when sun and stone embrace, the Druids gathered. Imagine it. A circle of figures in wool and feather, some cloaked in dark greens, others bare-chested, painted in spiral and knot. The wind is high, but their voices rise higher, chanting not for spectacle, but for resonance. Each word shaped to harmonize with the earth beneath them, the sky above. A central fire burns low, not for warmth, but for signal. A beacon to the spirits. A flare to the stars. This is ritual, not theater, but communion. Each act is symbolic, but symbols in the Druidic world are not hollow. They are doors. A branch placed just so. A circle drawn in chalk. A cup of spring water poured out at dawn. These are not metaphors. They are enactments of truth, mirroring the cycles of the world, inviting harmony, calling the invisible into the visible. Some say they sang the year into being, that their chants marked the turning of the wheel, Imbolc, Beltane, Lugnasad, Samhain. Not simply dates, but pulses in the land's own body. Moments when the veil thinned, and what was beneath could rise. And at the heart of it all, the stone. Immovable. Eternal. Listening. The rituals varied. Sometimes they were solemn, a single druid tracing a circle with ash, whispering to the wind as he read the stars. Other times they were vast, dozens gathered, drums echoing like thunder, dancers spiraling in rings until they became the wind itself. And always the stones watched. You step into the center of the circle now. There's no one else here. Only you. And yet, you don't feel alone. The stones feel aware. Not in the way a person watches. More like the way a mountain remembers. You close your eyes and place your hand on one of them. It hums. Not with sound. With memory. You see flickers, shapes moving by firelight, a voice raised in chant, a figure kneeling, arms lifted to the moon. It's not a vision, not exactly. More like a smell or a taste. A pressure in your bones. An ache for something you've never known, and yet miss. That's the gift of these circles. They do not show you the past. They awaken the part of you that has always been old. The part that remembers how to dance without music. How to speak without words. How to believe, not with the mind, but with the marrow. And so you understand. This is why the Druids came here. Because in the stone circles, time does not move forward. It moves around. Each solstice a return. Each shadow a map. Each chant a key. They were not trying to control the world. They were trying to stay in rhythm with it. To walk in step with the stars. To bow when the sun bows. To rise when the moon calls. Because when your world is woven with spirit, ritual is not optional. It is survival. Not of the body. Of the soul. You open your eyes. The stone stands silent before you. It has said all it needs to say. But now, something stirs in the east. The light shifts. Not just any light. It is precise, piercing, golden as spilled honey. It slides between two stones, brushing the earth at your feet, warming the moss with ancient fire. It is midsummer. And for a moment, just one aching, perfect moment, you feel the entire circle breathe. Not with lungs. With time. You are standing not in the past, but in the pulse of something eternal. And as the light fades, and the wind picks up once more, you step back, quietly, carefully, knowing now what the Druids knew. The stones are not relics. They are mirrors. And in them, if you dare, you may glimpse yourself, not as you are, but as you were meant to be. The wind grows stronger as you leave the circle. It sweeps across the high moor like a voice without language, threading itself through the heather, the grass, your hair. The sky has opened completely now, no canopy of leaves above, no shadows to shelter beneath. Only blue, and drifting cloud, and the sun, high and clear as a polished shield. And you begin to notice something strange. Not strange in the sense of the uncanny, but in the sense of awareness. Every step you take feels aligned. as though your feet follow not a trail, but a rhythm. Not carved into earth, but marked in shadow and light. The sun falls just so across a rise in the land. A line of distant hills perfectly frames the descending moon. And somewhere ahead, a lone hawk circles not randomly, but deliberately, its path tracing a spiral into the sky. This, too, was the Druids' realm. Not just the forest. Not just the grove. Not only the stone and the fire and the chant. But the sky. The vast, ever-changing dome that held the secrets of time itself. To walk with a Druid was to walk with someone who knew the stars, not in the way of sailors or scholars, but as if they were kin. As if the constellations were cousins, and the moon an old friend. We call them astronomers now. But that word feels too narrow. They were sky watchers, pattern knowers, keepers of the rhythm of light. In a world without clocks, without calendars, without printed almanacs or celestial charts, the Druid was the keeper of cosmic time. The one who could say, with absolute certainty, when the days would begin to lengthen again, when the tide would rise, when the blood of animals ran warm and the seeds would take root. They didn't use telescopes. They didn't draw maps of planets. But they watched. And from that watching, they knew. You find a high place now, a ridge of stone and grass overlooking a wide valley. The sky here seems even larger, and the land below unfolds like a living map. There is no sundial, no device in your hand. But if you look closely, you begin to see it. Lines of shadow stretch from rock to tree, from hill to standing stone. The clouds move in a pattern that's not random, but part of a great, slow dance. And above all, the sun continues its arc, not just today, but across the year. Rising and setting not always in the same place, but inching day by day along the horizon, marking time not in hours, but in meaning. This is what the Druids saw. And more than saw, understood. They tracked the solstices, the longest and shortest days, because those were the hinges of the year. Moments of turning, of pause, when the balance of light and darkness teetered. Midsummer, with its firelight and fertility. Midwinter, with its promise of return. But they also knew the equinoxes, when day and night stood as equals. And beyond that, the cross quarters, the hidden points between the cardinal days. Imbolc, Beltane, Lugnasad, Samhain. You feel these names now not as festivals, but as coordinates. Anchors in the wheel of time. Each one tied to the sun's position, the tilt of the earth, the pulse of life. And they did not learn these by accident. They watched. For generations. Night after night, they marked the stars' slow drift across the seasons. They learned which stars rose first in summer, and which vanished in winter. They followed the waxing and waning of the moon, not just in shape, but in timing, in rhythm, in mood. They learned that certain plants bloomed under certain skies, that births peaked during specific moon phases, that sickness spread with damp, dark months when the Pleiades vanished. They learned to read the sky as one might read the face of a friend. Not just what it said, but what it meant. And from that knowledge came power. Imagine it. A warrior chief, uncertain whether to launch a raid. He consults the Druid, not for strategy, but for timing. The Druid watches the moon that night, then speaks. Wait 2 nights more. The tide will favor our return, and Mars will pass behind the clouds. Was it divine guidance? Or astronomical calculation? To the people, it was the same. Because what mattered wasn't just prediction. It was confidence. Certainty. The Druid knew what others could not. And in that knowing became indispensable. They were not fortune tellers. Not always. But they could foresee eclipses. That alone was enough to render them supernatural in the eyes of their people. Imagine the terror of a total eclipse, sudden darkness in the middle of the day, the sun devoured, birds falling silent. Now imagine the Druid standing calm in the shadow, saying, This too shall pass. And it does. That is power. And it came not from magic, but from watching, from noticing, from remembering. Here, high on this ridge, you begin to feel how immense a task that was. No apps, no algorithms, only the sky. And the patience to watch it, year after year, without distraction. It required silence, stillness, devotion. You realize something else, too. This wasn't just science. It was sacred. Because to the Druids, the sky was not just a mechanism. It was a language spoken by the divine. The gods did not dwell in some other world, aloof and unreachable. They moved in the stars. They wrote in light. And the Druid, like a scribe of fire and frost, read those words aloud. But not to everyone. Because this knowledge, too, was guarded. Not hoarded, but protected. You couldn't just know the sky. You had to be worthy of it. The years of memorization, of training, of walking barefoot under cold stars, these were not tests of endurance alone. They were rites of alignment. To be entrusted with the sky's rhythm was to be responsible for the tribe's survival. Plant too early, and the frost kills your crop. Travel too late, and the floods take your cattle. Every Druid was, in a way, a clockmaker of flesh, tuned to the ticking of the cosmos. Some even wore star patterns sewn into their cloaks. Not as decoration, but as reminder. Each stitch a constellation. Each loop of thread a fragment of myth, of memory, of meaning. The sky above mirrored the earth below. As above, so below. The phrase is ancient. Older than Rome. Older than ink. It echoed in Druidic practice. They saw the spiral in the snail's shell, and in the galaxies overhead. They saw the turning of the seasons mirrored in the phases of human life: birth, growth, death, return. Their rituals weren't meant to control nature. They were meant to join it, to be in sync, to move as the stars moved. And so the Druid became something more than a priest, more than a scholar. They became a bridge between earth and sky, between the eternal and the immediate, between what was seen and what could be known. You lie back on the grass now, looking up. The sky stretches endless above you, and yet not empty. Each star, a point on a map you can't quite read. Each cloud, a breath of some great creature still dreaming. The sun warms your face, but the wind carries a chill, a whisper that soon it will turn, that the light will begin to fade, that autumn waits with golden hands just out of sight. You understand now what the Druids saw. The sky is not silent. It sings, but only for those who remember how to listen. The wind shifts. You notice it first in the scent, less of heather now, less of cool air and highland stone. There's something warmer on the breeze. Faint, but unmistakable. A curl of smoke. The dry whisper of ash. The breath of fire. You follow it instinctively. Down from the ridge, the path slopes toward a hollow ringed with low stones and crowned with dark, windswept trees. In its center burns a fire. Small, contained, and steady. No great pyre, no beacon. Just flame, as it has always been. Alive. Watching. You sit before it wordless. It needs no tending. It burns like memory. And now you understand. The forest was the lungs. The stones were the bones. The stars were the eyes. But fire was the heartbeat. In the Druidic world, fire was never just heat. It was threshold. It marked transitions, of season, of spirit, of story. It danced between the living and the dead, between light and dark, between what had passed and what was yet to come. Fire was sacred not because it was feared, but because it was true, unmistakable, transformative. In fire, all things reveal their nature. The Druid knew this. And so the year itself was marked by flame. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, literal. 4 great fires, each one an axis on the wheel of time. In bulk, the light of the lambing season, when the earth stirred beneath frost. Beltane, the roaring fire of fertility and protection, leaping between worlds. Lugnasad, the ember of harvest, both gratitude and grief. Samhain, the smoldering gate to the other world, when the veil thinned and spirits passed. Each fire was kindled with care. No matchstick sparks. No casual flick of flint. The Druid lit it with invocation, with a blessing, a rhythm, a breath. Because fire must be invited, respected, honored. The most famous of these rites took place on the hill of Uisneach in ancient Ireland. There, at the navel of the land, the sacred fire of Beltane was lit. Not merely to welcome summer, but to begin it. That one fire sent its light rippling outward across the hills, where smaller fires would be kindled in response. A chain of flame, a heartbeat spreading through the land. And it wasn't just ritual. It was medicine. Animals were driven between twin fires to cleanse them. Lovers leapt flames to seal their bonds. Children danced on the outer edges, eyes wide with awe, learning the rhythm without words. The fire was a teacher. It taught patience, waiting for the right moment to light it. It taught humility, knowing when to feed it, and when to let it die. It taught letting go, watching offerings curl into smoke, into sky. You can see it now, if you close your eyes. A circle of people, quiet at first, gathered before the unlit pyre. The Druid stands beside it, not above, not apart, but with them. She raises her hands. Not in command, but in invitation. She speaks, not in Latin or Greek, but in a tongue no longer remembered, one shaped by stone and leaf and wind. And the fire is lit. And something begins. Not just the season, but a change inside each one who watches. A remembering. Because the fire doesn't just warm the skin. It burns away what is no longer needed. It clears. It cauterizes. It calls. This is why Samhain, the year's end, was also marked by fire. Not celebration, remembrance. Flames lit for the dead, for the ancestors, for the unseen guests who passed through unseen doors. Hearths were left burning through the night to guide them. Candles placed in hollowed turnips or gourds, flickering in windows, in hedges, in hands. Not to frighten. To honor. The fire was not a barrier. It was a bridge. And so the Druid, again, became the keeper, not of the flame itself, but of its meaning. They knew when to light it, when to douse it, when to feed it, and with what. Because not all fire is the same. There is fire for warmth, and fire for warning, fire for purification, and fire for change. Some was kindled in the open, watched by many. Other flames were lit in secret groves, deep within oaken hollows, for eyes that did not blink. And in these fires, truths were burned. Old weapons, old names, old fears. Because to the Druid, fire was not destruction. It was transformation. Death not as end, but as return. Ash to soil. Smoke to sky. You watch the fire before you now. It crackles softly. The flames lean eastward in the breeze, and each spark that lifts into the air carries a story you will never know. And yet, you feel them. There, in the pop of resin. In the dance of ember. In the scent of wood once living, now consumed. Each fire you've ever sat beside is here, in some way. Each whisper. Each song. Each silence. And for a moment, you understand why the Druid placed so much faith in flame. Because unlike stone or sky or grove, fire does not remain. It cannot be possessed. It can only be witnessed, honored, and let go. You pick up a small bundle of dried herbs from the earth beside you. You don't remember placing it there. But your hands know what to do. You cast it gently into the flame. It hisses, and then releases a cloud of scent so rich, so wild, it stings your eyes. mugwort, juniper, sweet grass, herbs of memory, of cleansing, of opening. The fire shifts color, green, then gold, then back to orange. It speaks, not in language, in presence. And then, slowly, it dies. Not with violence, with dignity. Like something that has fulfilled its purpose. You sit with the embers. And you realize, the fire was not the ritual. You were. It burned not to change the world, but to change you. And now the path opens once more. The sky is darker now, and the stars begin to prick the horizon with light. But behind your eyes the fire still burns. Not with heat, but with meaning. The path twists again. Not sharply. Not suddenly. Just a slow curling, as though the land itself is leading you not forward, but inward. Down into questions. Into blood and belief. Because no journey into the world of the Druids can be complete without brushing against the darkest of stories. The most unsettling of claims. The tales that whisper not of stars or groves or fire, but of sacrifice. Of blood spilled. Of lives given, or taken, in the name of the sacred. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Men bound in wicker cages, screaming as flames climbed their limbs. Children offered to gods with names lost to time. Hearts torn from chests and held aloft beneath solstice moons. But you pause now. Because something doesn't feel right. Something in those stories smells not of ash or iron, but of ink. Roman ink. Greek ink. Conqueror's ink. And so, before you accept the tales, you listen for the truth beneath them. The grove you enter now is different. Lower. Darker. Rocks line the edges of a small pool, black water reflecting nothing. A circle of ancient yews arches above, their twisted roots exposed like claws. You feel it in your chest, that tightening, that awareness. This is a place of endings, but also of renewal. Because in the Druidic mind, the two are inseparable. Let's begin with what we know. The Romans, especially Caesar, wrote of the Druids as blood priests. He described human sacrifices as part of their rituals. Criminals, captives, even innocents placed in giant wicker men and burned alive to appease the gods. It's the image that has endured. Dramatic. Terrifying. And for Rome, useful. Because to depict your enemy as savage is to justify their destruction. The Druids were, after all, not just local holy men. They were the heart of a cultural system that resisted Rome. So Caesar painted them as cruel. But the truth? It's harder, stranger, and far more human. Yes, sacrifice was part of the ancient Celtic world. But not as spectacle. Not as madness. As offering. And the lines between what was given and what was taken were far more complex than Caesar would ever admit. Think about it. What is sacrifice, really? Is it just blood? Or is it loss? Deliberate, meaningful loss. A gift so precious, so costly, that offering it breaks something open in the world. A king laying down his crown. A mother giving her last bread. A warrior stepping into death, not for glory, but to feed the land with his ending. In this light, sacrifice is not murder. It's medicine. Painful, yes, but precise. Now return to this grove. Beneath the roots of you, offerings were placed, not always living, not always bloody. Pins, coins, knives bent in ritual. Food, hair, milk, bones, and sometimes, yes, bodies. In bogs, perfectly preserved. Their skin darkened, their hair still curled, their fingernails intact. Some show signs of violence, throats cut, limbs broken, carefully placed. But were they victims? Or volunteers? Some were symbols of high status. Not slaves. Not war prisoners. Chosen. Perhaps even honored. And in this, We must let go of our modern revulsion, our instinct to label any death outside a hospital bed as atrocity. To the Druids, life was not linear. It cycled, spiraled. Death was not an end, but a door. And if a life could open that door, bring rain to a dry land, or peace to a cursed tribe, it was not evil. It was sacred. There is even a story of the threefold death, a mythic pattern echoed in Celtic tales, where a figure dies three ways: by hanging, by drowning, and by wounding. Why? Symbolism. Each death linked to a different element, to different gods, to a full offering of the self. Not random, not cruel, ritualized. So we must ask, if a Druid oversaw such a death, was it murder? Or miracle? It depends on who you ask. To the Romans, who prized conquest, who feared mystery, who controlled with law and coin, it was barbarism. To the Celts, it may have been prayer. And now, centuries later, we must tread carefully. Because to romanticize blood is as dangerous as to condemn it blindly. But here, in this quiet, root-shadowed grove, the question lingers. What are we willing to give for the world to heal? What part of ourselves? What comfort? What illusion? Because maybe the Druid knew something we've forgotten. That without sacrifice, real sacrifice, nothing changes. Not truly. Not deeply. And so the myths of the Wicker Man persist. Maybe some were true. Maybe most were not. Maybe they were propaganda, or warnings, or garbled retellings of rituals misunderstood by those who watched from a distance. But this much is certain. The Druid did not deal in half measures. When they gave everything. And whether the offering was blood, or breath, or belief, it mattered. It moved the world. You rise from the stone where you've been sitting. The grove feels quieter now. Not empty. Witnessed. You step carefully over the roots. You breathe. You walk on. And behind you, in the silence, the questions remain. Unanswered. But not ignored. Because truth, real truth, is not a sword. It is a fire. And we are meant to walk through it. Let's walk forward now, past the grove of endings, past the shadows that whisper of sacrifice and sacred blood. The forest clears slightly. The air steadies. And ahead, we enter a different kind of sacred space, not marked by fire or stone or sky, but by silence and listening. You emerge from the trees into a wide clearing, not wild like before, but calm, measured, almost expectant. There is a stillness here. Not the eerie hush of ancient yew groves, nor the reverent quiet of a stone's circle at dawn. This silence feels different, as if it is waiting for a word. And not just any word, a final word. You realize, you are not in a temple. You are in a court. Though there are no walls, no thrones. Only a single, flat stone in the center of the space, weathered, worn smooth by time and presence. Around it, smaller stones, arranged not for spectacle, but for function. Seats, perhaps. Places to bear witness. This is not a stage. It is a forum. A judgment place. And the figure who once stood here, who once stepped into the circle with neither blade nor staff nor crown, but with voice alone, was a Druid. The lawbringer. The listener. The final authority in a world without written codes or royal edicts. Because long before kings ruled with scepters, long before laws were inked into scrolls and stored in libraries, there was the Druid. And when disputes broke out, over land, over cattle, over insult or blood, it was to the Druid that people turned. Not as policeman, not as tyrant, as judge. But not the kind you might imagine. There was no gavel, no powdered wig, only the weight of memory. Because in a world without books, the law lived inside the Druid, learned by heart, recited by breath, passed from teacher to student in endless hours of repetition and reflection, until it became as much a part of the body as the blood. It was not abstract. It was living. And justice was personal. To understand this, you must leave behind the image of law as punishment. The Druid was not there to exact revenge or to enforce power. They were there to restore balance. Because in the Celtic worldview, wrongdoing was not a breach of rule, it was a tear in the fabric of community. And it had to be mended. Not just with fines or exile, but with understanding, with reparation, with ritual. Take, for example, the concept of honor price, a person's worth, measured not in coin, but in reputation. If someone wronged you, the damage wasn't to your body or your property alone. It was to your standing, your name. And the Druid, knowing your history, your lineage, your deeds, would weigh that value, carefully, publicly, and determine the appropriate path forward. Not what was fair, what would heal. And that could mean compensation, or apology, or fasting, or service. But always, it meant facing the harm done, not avoiding it, not burying it, facing it. Because a wound ignored festers. But a wound addressed, acknowledged, can close. This is why the Druid's word was final. Not because of fear, because of trust. Because everyone knew the Druid had no army, no family to avenge, no land to defend, only memory, only wisdom. And so when they spoke, the forest itself seemed to lean in, because their judgment did not come from power. It came from clarity. They had watched the sun and moon. They had walked through fire. They had listened to the dead. And now, they listened to the living. Imagine this place, 1,000 years ago. 2 tribes gathered, tensions high, weapons at their sides, elders whispering. The dispute is old, land passed down in unclear ways, boundaries lost in time and argument. A woman steps forward. Not old. Not young. A Druid. Her voice is low but firm. She begins not with orders, but with questions. She asks the elders what they remember. She asks the warriors what they were told. She asks the land, literally, walking the boundaries, feeling the rise and fall beneath her feet. She consults the stars, not for magic, but for timing, for harmony. And only when all has been gathered, all, does she speak her decision. Not a verdict. A path. One that restores dignity. That names harm without shaming. That repairs what has been broken. And both sides, though perhaps not happy, nod. Because the Druid has seen them. And that, more than victory, is what most people want. To be seen. To be known. To be understood. You sit now on one of the smaller stones, looking toward the flat judgment seat. The sun is low. The sky flushed gold. And you feel it, the weight of silence again. The kind that holds breath. Not fear. Respect. Because to sit in judgment is not easy. To bear witness to pain, to anger, to sorrow, and to respond not with reaction, but with truth, that is a burden few can carry. But the Druids did. Because they were not only keepers of lore. They were menders. Of wounds. Of tribes. Of time itself. And their justice was not swift. It was deep. Measured in centuries. In story. In soil. Even now, some fragments survive. Old Brehon laws in Ireland. Snippets of legal triads in Welsh. Tales of wise men and women settling feuds with words alone, long after the sword had failed. Echoes. But echoes, when listened to carefully, can lead you home. The forest rustles behind you. The judgment place remains still. And in your chest something settles. A knowing. That justice is not cold. It is not blind. It is not distant. It is the act of seeing clearly. And acting from wholeness. As the Druids did. Not from power, but from wisdom. The forest guiding us onward, not toward judgment now, but into a quieter, more fragrant corner of the Druidic world. The place of green things, of roots and leaves, of knowledge grown in soil and stirred in smoke. You leave the clearing behind. The stone of judgment fades into the hush of undergrowth, and the trees grow closer again, not the towering oaks of sacred groves, but humbler companions, hazel, alder, birch. Their branches hang lower. Their leaves shine with dew. And then the scent reaches you. Not of decay. Not even of wild forest. But something purposeful. Bitter. Sweet. Earthy. Sharp. The scent of preparation. You follow it through bramble and moss, down into a shallow glen where sunlight dapples the ground in golden shards. And there, it opens. A garden, though nothing here is ordered by neat rows or tidy beds. The plants grow as they please, intertwined, sprawling, wild, but each one is known. Recognized. Not weeds, not randomness. Remedies. Poisons. Potions. A druid's apothecary. But not made of glass and metal. Made of root and leaf. Feather and bark. Fungus and flower. Because among all the mysteries that wrapped the Druids in awe and fear, this was one of their most potent and misunderstood. Their knowledge of the green world. Not magic. Mastery. You kneel beside a cluster of low purple blossoms, heather, blooming soft and thick. Once used for calming spirits. For restful sleep. For rituals of passing. Beside it, the silvery fronds of mugwort, bitter and powerful, burned in ceremonies to call dreams and visions. And there, a flash of yellow, celandine. To cleanse wounds. To chase away darkness. The forest is not just a setting. It is a pharmacy. And the Druid was the one who knew which leaf soothed, and which burned. Which berry fed, and which killed. This was not trial and error wisdom. It was memory, long, careful, collective. Passed from one mouth to the next, from one hand to another, in seasons and shadows. The Druid was healer and herbalist. But also sorcerer. Because to know the plants was to hold power most others could not even name. A Druid could end a fever with a poultice of comfort and honey. But they could also induce visions with henbane steeped in wine. They could calm a mother in labor with valerian root, and then anoint the child with oils pressed from wild rose. They could brew potions to protect a warrior from fear, or mix a draught to bring about forgetting. But perhaps no plant holds more mystery in Druidic lore than one that grows not from the ground, but on the trees. Mistletoe. You see it now, high above you, green even in winter, clutching the branch of an ancient oak like a secret kept aloft. To the Druids, mistletoe was sacred beyond all others. They called it allheal. Not just for its medicinal uses, though it was believed to treat everything from infertility to epilepsy, but for its place in the world. It grew without root in soil. It floated, suspended between heaven and earth, drawing light from the oak, itself already sacred. To find mistletoe in such a place was not common. It was a sign, a blessing, a key, and it could not be harvested casually. Only at certain times, often at the 6th day of the moon, when its power was believed to peak. Only with sacred tools. The Druid would climb, robes trailing, eyes fixed not on the plant but on the heavens. A golden sickle in hand, not for its sharpness, but its symbolism. Sunlight made blade. They would cut the mistletoe with a prayer. And beneath, cloths would be spread, not to catch it for convenience, but because to let it touch the ground was to drain its power. It must be caught, cradled, honored. Imagine that moment. The crowd gathered in the cold. The chant rising. The mistletoe falling, like a green comet from the sky. And the people cheering, not for spectacle, but for hope. Because in their minds, what fell into the cloth was not just a plant. It was medicine from the gods. You touch the herbs around you now. Chamomile, to soothe dreams. Nettle, for blood and bone. Wormwood, for courage and curses. Each one known not just for its use, but for its story. Because the Druid didn't just learn the properties. They learned the personalities. Which plants liked to grow together. Which thrived in moonlight. Which withered if handled without song. And so healing was not formula. It was relationship. To pick the wrong herb was not just a mistake, it was a betrayal. The land watched. The plants responded. And the Druid, in tending them, became something more than a healer. They became a translator. Between human and green. Between pain and remedy. Between wound and peace. But this knowledge was not always trusted. To the outsider, the Druid's garden looked like a place of secrets. Of smoke and whispering. Of vials tucked into robes. And yes, there was danger. Because some herbs did kill. And some dreams opened by mugwort could not be shut again. But to fear the medicine because it had power, is to fear the cure because it is bitter. The Druid did not fear. They listened. To the rustle of leaves. To the pulse of sap. To the breath of roots beneath soil. They knew that healing was not always comfort. Sometimes it was sweat. Or burning. Or sleep so deep you forgot your name. But afterward, clarity. Return. You lie back now in the garden. The green closes around you. Not oppressive. Cradling. A lullaby in leaf and scent. And you realize, this was not a fringe of Druidic practice. It was the core. Because to know the plants is to know the land. And to know the land is to know yourself. You breathe in time. You exhale fear. And somewhere, not far off, a golden sickle catches the light. A sign that the old knowledge is not gone. Only waiting. Patient. Growing. Let's rise now, gently, from the herbal garden where healing lingered on every leaf. The scent of time still clings to your skin. But the wind has shifted. It carries another scent, darker, sharper. Not medicinal. Metallic. The scent of iron. You move through the underbrush, and the forest begins to change again. The birds are quieter. The ground is rougher. Twigs snap more easily underfoot. And somewhere in the distance, a horn sounds, low and long, a note that vibrates not just in your chest but in your bones. You are walking now into a different part of the Druidic world. Not the place of quiet wisdom. Not the grove of judgment or the garden of herbs. But the field. The raw, thunderous edge of battle. It surprises many to learn that Druids walked here, too. That in the world of spears and shields, of blood and screams, of banners raised beneath darkening skies, the Druid was present. But they were. Not in ranks. Not in armor. But in spirit. In voice. In presence. Because before the first arrow flew, before the first sword rang against the shield, the Druid had already spoken. They were never soldiers. They carried no blades. But they were warriors of a different kind. And their power on the battlefield was felt like a tide. Let us step into it. Imagine the night before a battle. Two tribes have met at the edge of a wide plain. The fires are lit, but lo. The warriors sharpen their spears in silence, painting their faces with woad and ochre, whispering prayers they learned as children. And then, the Druid comes. Not to command. To invoke. Their robes trail behind them like smoke. They carry no weapon. Only a staff. A branch from a sacred tree, carved with symbols known only to a few. They speak. Not loudly. But clearly. And the warriors listen. Because the Druid's words are not just instructions. They are spells. Not the kind you find in books of fantasy. But the real kind. The kind that alters hearts. That steals resolve. That anchors chaos. They might chant. Low and rhythmic. A beat that syncs with breath and blood. They might pass between the warriors, touching each one with a drop of sacred oil, or a whispered blessing. They might raise their arms and call upon the sky, not for lightning, but for favor. For balance. Because war, in the Druids' eyes, was not glorious. It was costly. It tore at the web of harmony they worked so carefully to weave. And so if it must happen, if blood must be shed, they ensured it was not meaningless. That it had context, purpose, and consequence. They were, in this way, both part of the war and its restraint. There are stories, whispers in Roman accounts, of Druids stepping between armies, arms raised, faces painted with symbols of death and rebirth. And both sides stopping. Not because they feared punishment. Because they felt something shift. Because when a Druid stood between you and your enemy, you were no longer in the world of men. You had entered the sacred. And to strike in that moment was to invite ruin. And yet, if the battle did come, the Druid remained, not at the front, but near enough, sometimes watching from a rise, sometimes chanting from within the trees, their voice weaving through the clash like smoke through fire. They did not fear death, because they had walked with it too often, in rituals, in sacrifice, in prophecy. To the Druid, death was not defeat, it was transformation. And so they taught the warriors not just how to fight, but how to die. With intention. With clarity. With the soul prepared. A warrior who entered battle with the Druids' blessing walked differently. Not arrogantly, but with stillness. With purpose. There's even a tale from Ireland, of Cathbad, the Druid of Ulster, who prophesied that anyone taking up arms that day would achieve everlasting fame, but live only a short life. And young Cuchulainn, hearing this, chose to fight. Not for pride, but for meaning. The Druid had told the truth, and that truth shaped the legend. Not all Druids supported war. Many worked to avoid it. Through negotiation. Through mediation. Through dreams. But when conflict could not be prevented, they made it sacred. And sacred does not mean clean. It means real. It means understood. It means nothing is hidden. The pain. The price. The power. They may have used herbs too. To dull pain. To induce fury. To calm a heart beating too fast. They may have drawn symbols in ash across a warrior's chest. Marks meant not just for the body, but for the spirit. They may have whispered words into the ears of leaders, words shaped to guide, to challenge, to protect. And when the battle was over, the Druid returned again. To mourn. To mark the fallen. To call the names of the dead beneath the moon, so that they would not wander lost. They placed the hands of enemies beside each other, closed eyes gently, poured water over the bloodied earth. Because even in war, the Druid remembered life. They remembered the song beneath the scream, the soul beneath the armor, and the land, always the land, beneath the shattered field. You stand now at the edge of such a field. The wind carries the faintest echo, not of steel, of chant. You can almost see them, the Druid, standing beneath a storm-heavy sky, arms outstretched, robes snapping like banners, calling not for victory, but for balance, for restoration, for meaning. Because even here, especially here, the sacred must not be forgotten. Let us move onward, step by slow step, deeper into our story, crossing the threshold where forest meets empire, where sacred memory collides with conquest. The path softens beneath your feet, and the air carries another charge. The echo of marching boots, the weight of banners, the hush before thunder. You stand now at the boundary, Rome versus the Druids, and the journey continues. The trees thin as you climb a gentle slope, a silent ridge overlooking rolling fields traced in distant roads. From here, the Roman world begins to hover. Tidy campfires, engineer-crafted paths, disciplined ranks, not foreign in appearance, but utterly dissonant in spirit. The Druids knew Rome in their bones long before the legions set foot in Gaul. Caesar, proud Roman general turned chronicler, recorded what he saw, what he believed others needed to fear. He described Druids as a priestly caste, second only in esteem to warriors, advising their clans, guiding them through law, stars, and the unseen threads of life. JSTOR. Work. Imperium Romanum. But he shaped that description to fit a narrative. For to the Roman ear, Druids were both fascinating and monstrous. Learned in astronomy and philosophy, yes, but also alleged killers, wielders of wicker men filled with flesh and flame. Imperium Romanum. Pliny the Elder, aiming to justify Roman deeds, painted them as magical, brutal practitioners, monstrous rites, blaming them for teaching that to kill a man was an act of holiness, and consuming him a blessing. Reddit. +1. Roman policy allowed most conquered peoples religious freedom, so long as their rites fit the imperial mold. Druids did not. Their blood rituals, their power over memory, threatened the very soul of empire. Imperium Romanum. +5. Reddit. +5. Reddit. +5. In Gaul, under Tiberius and Claudius, Druidic orders were suppressed by Senate decree. In Britain, laws banned their rites, and Roman arms marched to date their sanctuaries. Reddit. +13. +13. Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. +13. One brutal act stands out, told by Tacitus: the landing on Anglesey, Mona, a stronghold of ancient Druidic power. Druids stood, arms raised, voices tearing across the field in curses so fierce that Roman soldiers faltered. But then the legions charged, fire swelled, groves burned, and temples fell silent. Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. +3. Imperium Romanum. +3. +3. Imagine you stand where that grove once lived. The ground is soft, the grass tall. No altar, no smoke. Only faint echo. Here, the Druids did not yield because they lacked strength. They yielded because the world pressed too hard. Rome did not just build roads, it built belief, cities, laws. And the Druid order, built on oral memory, grove and sky, could not stand that. Yet, resilience lingered. Even as Druids vanished from high places, they endured in whispered prayers, in hidden rituals, in seasons marked secretly, in grooves carved into hidden stone. Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. Some sided with Rome. Diviciacus, Druid of the Aedui tribe, an aristocrat versed in diplomacy and stars, traveled to Rome. He spoke to Cicero, pleaded his people's case. He bridged worlds, Druid and Roman, memory and reason. +1. But most did not bridge. They withdrew. Into the highlands. Into Ireland. Into night. And in silence their magic lived on. This collision, Rome versus Druids, was more than empire confronting religion. It was the clash of narratives. Of logos versus lore. Of law versus memory. Rome wrote laws. Druids carried memory. And though Rome defeated armies, they could not fully extinguish the forest's pulse. The legacy, though altered, endured in places, songs, rhythms unseen by conquerors. Does that make them defeated? No. Because memory cannot be destroyed. Only displaced. And as you stand on that ridge, even without seeing fire or hearing curses, something is still alive here. A promise. A pause. A reminder that some voices, once shaped by grove, bark, and breath, are too deep to die. The path softens beneath your feet, and the air carries another charge. The echo of marching boots, the weight of banners, the hush before thunder. You stand now at the boundary, Rome versus the Druids, and the journey continues. The trees thin as you climb a gentle slope, a silent ridge overlooking rolling fields traced in distant roads. From here, the Roman world begins to hover. Tidy campfires, engineer-crafted paths, disciplined ranks, not foreign in appearance, but utterly dissonant in spirit. The Druids knew Rome in their bones long before the legions set foot in Gaul. Caesar, proud Roman general turned chronicler, recorded what he saw, what he believed others needed to fear. He described Druids as a priestly caste, second only in esteem to warriors, advising their clans, guiding them through law, stars, and the unseen threads of life. But he shaped that description to fit a narrative. For to the Roman ear, Druids were both fascinating and monstrous. Learned in astronomy and philosophy, yes, but also alleged killers, wielders of wicker men filled with flesh and flame. Pliny the Elder, aiming to justify Roman deeds, painted them as magical, brutal practitioners, monstrous rites, blaming them for teaching that to kill a man was an act of holiness, and consuming him a blessing. Roman policy allowed most conquered peoples religious freedom, so long as their rites fit the imperial mold. Druids did not. Their blood rituals, their power over memory, threatened the very soul of empire. In Gaul, under Tiberius and Claudius, Druidic orders were suppressed by Senate decree. In Britain, laws banned their rites, and Roman arms marched to date their sanctuaries. One brutal act stands out, told by Tacitus: the landing on Anglesey, Mona, a stronghold of ancient Druidic power. Druids stood, arms raised, voices tearing across the field in curses so fierce that Roman soldiers faltered. But then the legions charged, fire swelled, groves burned, and temples fell silent. Imagine you stand where that grove once lived. The ground is soft, the grass tall. No altar, no smoke. Only faint echo. Here, the Druids did not yield because they lacked strength. They yielded because the world pressed too hard. Rome did not just build roads, it built belief, cities, laws. And the Druid order, built on oral memory, grove and sky, could not stand that. Yet, resilience lingered. Even as Druids vanished from high places, they endured in whispered prayers, in hidden rituals, in seasons marked secretly, in grooves carved into hidden stone. Some sided with Rome. Diviciacus, Druid of the Aedui tribe, an aristocrat versed in diplomacy and stars, traveled to Rome. He spoke to Cicero, pleaded his people's case. He bridged worlds, Druid and Roman, memory and reason. But most did not bridge. They withdrew. Into the highlands. Into Ireland. Into night. And in silence their magic lived on. This collision, Rome versus Druids, was more than empire confronting religion. It was the clash of narratives. Of logos versus lore. Of law versus memory. Rome wrote laws. Druids carried memory. And though Rome defeated armies, they could not fully extinguish the forest's pulse. The legacy, though altered, endured in places, songs, rhythms unseen by conquerors. Does that make them defeated? No. Because memory cannot be destroyed. Only displaced. And as you stand on that ridge, even without seeing fire or hearing curses, something is still alive here. A promise. A pause. A reminder that some voices, once shaped by grove, bark, and breath, are too deep to die. Let us continue our journey forward, guided by the forest's hush, a subtle shift in air, a deepening quiet. We step beyond the echoes of war, beyond the songs of women seers, and now enter a realm of fading footprints and forgotten voices. We walk toward what history calls the disappearance. You follow a narrow woodland path where bracken dances in twilight. The air grows still, not oppressively silent, but as if the forest itself is listening. Somewhere deep beneath your feet, old roots twist and settle, carrying secrets of centuries long past. Here, the land wears absence, not emptiness. It remembers. The Druids, once living at the heart of Celtic life, began to vanish, not with a final breath, but gently, like the slow closing of a dream. The echo of their voices faded not in a single moment, but across centuries. Rome was among the first to press upon their presence. In Gaul, under Emperor Tiberius, 14 to 37 C, Druidic orders were actively suppressed. By the 2nd century C, they had largely disappeared from the records of the classical world. But Rome's conquest was only one part of a grander tide. Out of Gaul and Britannia, another current rose, the early Christian Church. As its influence spread through Ireland, Wales, and eventually the lowlands and highlands, the role of the Druid transformed. In many cases, the learned Druids became the Christian Philid, the poets, judges, and keepers of lore, absorbed, rather than erased. Still, the process was not swift or uniform. In Ireland, where Roman legions never marched, Druidic practice seeped into Christian stories, surviving in monastic manuscripts as myth, as legend, Druids in disguise, their wisdom reshaped. Here, in this glen, the whispers of those transitions dwell between the ferns. The ecclesiastical monks wrote down myths that were once breathed under ancient groves. The laws in early medieval Irish codices, once oral traditions, may reflect Druidic precedents, preserved beneath. But what of the Druids themselves? They did not vanish with fanfare. Instead, they stepped back. Burning groves became suppressed memory. Sacred knowledge sank into folklore. The forest remembered, though voices were silenced. Some say the decline began not with Rome nor the Church alone, but with time itself. Disease, famine, tribal conflict, succession disputes gradually eroding the central structures that had upheld the Druidic tradition. By the early medieval centuries, the old ways had become shadows in stone carvings, in burials at mounds, in stories told beside firelight long after the groves had been cut or Christianized. Yet the forest did not forget. In the 8th century C, a monk named Blathmac wrote that Jesus was better than a prophet, more knowledgeable than every Druid, a startling testament to the memory of Druids lingering even in Christian praise. And the name endured, not as a living tradition, but as a ghost in literature. The Druid, a figure in medieval Irish tales, became the sorcerer, the wise man, sometimes the villain. Never central, yet always present. The disappearance, then, was not extinction. It was erasure. Eclipse. Druids became stories. Law became verse. Memory became myth. But under those old trees, beneath grass dotted with lichen, the root of it all remains. You pause and place a hand on the mossy trunk of an oak. It feels timeless. You wonder, do the rings recall the chant of a Druid? The hum of a ritual? The soft laughter of children learning seeds and stars? Perhaps. Disappearance is not nothingness. It is transformation. The Druid became a poet, a legend, a wise old face in dreams. They slipped into story, but every story carries a spark. And the forest? It still holds embers. As you rise to walk on, sunlight wanes, shadows stretch. You carry the hush with you now, the memory of something lost, but not gone. We step now into the legacy and myth, where the Druid's breath still echoes in legend, and the forgotten is quietly remembered. You stand in a clearing touched by gold and shadow. The light here feels different, softer, as if filtered through memory. The wind sways the leaves, not in the rhythm of the present, but in the thrum of a story long unfurled. If you listen closely, you can hear its pulse. The Druids live still, in myth, in song, in the names whispered across time. Their legacy did not die. It transformed. It became something older, richer, carried by story and symbol, by gods and heroes, by the land itself. Consider Amergin Gluingil, the bardic Druid of myth. He stood on a shore where no stone had been built, but where magic was thick in the air. He chanted, and the earth responded. Land rose. Seas calmed. Mountains bowed. In that ancient myth, he was not scholar, not healer, not advisor. He was voice, the song that shaped a world. And then there was Cathbad, Druid of the Ulster cycle, whose prophecy carved destiny like stone. Before Deirdre's beauty sparked war, Cathbad spoke, and blood flowed in his wake, not because his words were magic, but because he spoke truth. These figures emerged not from history, but from legend, and there they endure. Mug Ruth, the blind Druid of Munster, said to have flown in a chariot of storm, whose breath summoned tempests and turned men to stone. His story is wild, larger than nature, but it is no less Celtic for its exaggeration. In exaggeration, we feel the pulse of something real. The Druid is shapeshifter, wind chaser, boundary breaker. So too the Dagda, god, Druid king. His staff brought death and life. His cauldron never emptied. His harp flew itself to his hand. In him, the Druid and God fuse. And from him arises centuries of Celtic storytelling, the wise leader, the generous father, the keeper of all. These are not embellishments. They are evolutions. Because when the real Druids vanished from history, myth did not simply fill the void. It carried the truth of their roles forward. You might say that the Druidhood passed into the symbol of wisdom, not the person, and symbols live longer. In later Irish and Welsh tales, the Druid became the wizard in the wood, or the prophet in the tide. In some stories, a shapeshaper. In others, a destroyer. They turned into ciphers. But always, they carried memory. The trees, the sky, the cycle of seasons, they remained their heritage. And in these myths, the old stories, Druid tales, became the stories of poets, of saints even. Christian writers recast Druidic motifs into Christian figures, prophets who saw ghosts of divine light, judges who became hermits, healers who became saints. The names changed, but the roles remained. This is not theft. It's inheritance. The old blending into the new. Look at the story of Tlachga, red-haired druidess whose grief gave rise to a sacred hill, and whose name became tied to Samhain fires, echoing the Druidic patterns of seasonal ritual, transformed into medieval celebration. Or the sacred oak and mistletoe. Pliny's telling may be the only surviving account of that ritual, but its image, Druids in white, golden sickle in hand, sacred plant fallen onto cloth, has woven itself into our cultural fabric. From fiction to Asterix the Gaul, its footprint is vast, deeper than history. These myths endure because they are porous. They adapt. They breathe. Modern movements of neo-Druidism, revivalism, even campus parody, the reformed Druids of North America, show how the Druid ideal still inspires. In those groves, whether born in protest or deep devotion, people find refuge in the idea of nature as sacred, of wisdom as lived, of ritual as connection. You wander now among symbols, the oak, the cauldron, the chariot of wind, and realize how their essence persists, not because truth lies in books, but in hearts. Myth is not an endpoint. It is continuation. Unbroken. Even when history turns its back, myth waits. Telling you, you still know. You still remember. The Druid never left. They only changed homes, from grove to story, from stone to soul. And as the final shadows stretch across the forest, you carry their legacy with you, not in words written, but in the feeling of myth carried on your chest, heavy with meaning, alive in the hush of leaves. The light softens, shadows lengthen, and the forest's breath grows still. Here, in this sacred hush, we arrive at the whisper of forests, the silent verse that completes the circle. You come to the edge of a glade where little moves but the air itself. The trees stand tall and quiet, their leaves trembling in a breath you cannot feel. Beneath you, roots coil like slumbering serpents, weaving stories of centuries in soil no eye sees. This place feels alive in its stillness, not merely a glade, but a heart. Here, the forests whisper. Can you hear them? It is not a sound you catch with your ears, but with something older, softer than hearing, deeper than memory. Here is where the Druids live now. Not in bodies, but in breath, in green, in reverence. For their voices were not lost. They became woven into the forest's rhythm, in each oak's groan, each fern's green sigh. Each dawn breeze flickering through leaves like a remembered song. Imagine stepping into this hush after centuries on the road. No chant. No fire. No stone. Only forest, and its quiet knowing. Here, every tree is a page. Every branch a sentence. Every leaf a syllable. You step toward an ancient Druid oak, its trunk wide enough to cradle secret counsels, its bark so thick with lichen that centuries lie plastered in green. It is a living monument, the knower of oak trees, as Druid might name it. This oak has heard your steps. It knows your name, even though you have not spoken it. You place your hand on its bark. Your breath becomes part of its pulse. Can you feel it? A whisper, like wind kneading stone. A memory. How the Druids walked beside trees. Not to tame, but to remember. Now, here, beneath branching arches, seated between earth and sky, you understand. You are inside their legacy. Let me guide you without stepping forward. Because this place doesn't need your voice. It needs your stillness. Remember that the forest didn't fade when the Druids did. It absorbed them. It became their song. You look up. The sky is mottled with leaves and light. Motes of gold wobble in the air. Your chest rises and falls. Rhythm of bark and breath. The world hasn't ended. It only became quieter. More intimate. Now, the Druid you are is listening. You breathe in mist. You breathe out echoes. Behind you, the path stretches. But only if you choose to walk it. For here, in the hush, the forest invites you. Not to speak, but to hear. Then let us walk, slowly, softly, as if even our footsteps have grown tired, and now they drift like mist above moss. The forest closes gently behind us, not with force, but with tenderness. A hand placed lightly on the shoulder. A voice saying, "Rest now." We do not speak anymore. We do not need to. Because we have seen the sacred groves, and the stone circles under moonlight. We have felt the heat of sacred fire, and the hush of prophecy. We have walked beside women whose voices moved kings, and listened to the silence of words never written. We have stood in the shadow of Roman conquest, and in the glimmer of myth that would not die. And now we walk not to learn, but to dream. The trees above shimmer with starlight, though the sky itself is hidden. You hear nothing but your own breath. And then, even that fades. Because this is where the path ends, not in answers, but in echoes. And so, as the night settles, as the grove falls quiet, as the last spark of memory curls like smoke into the dark, may these whispers of the past guide you gently into dreams,